Now we'll get into the sharpness or smoothness and darkness or opacity of a shadow. By now you must have already guessed that if the light is soft, the shadows will also be soft. If the light is sharp, the shadows will also be sharp. And actually our first step is to observe if the light is sharp, bright or soft. So let's see this for example. You can see the sun is very bright and the shadows on the trees are very dark. So if you were to place any kind of object here, they will have a very sharp shadow and a very dark shadow. Same goes for these examples. The sun is very bright, the light is very bright, and the shadows are very sharp and long. So if you were to place a subject here, their shadows will be long towards the right side, and that will be very hard, sharp, and dark. Here's another example. You can see a sunny day on a beach. The light is very bright, so the shadow of the man is very dark and sharp. And as I mentioned earlier, the shadow will always follow the surface. You can see there's the slight little bumps on the shadow here because of the granules of the sand. Now exact opposite thing goes for soft shadows. If the environment is very cloudy and the light is not very bright, the shadow will be very smooth and soft, as you can see here. Here's another example. If the environment is very cloudy, as you can see the sky is not bright at all, so their shadows are very smooth and soft, and they are not very dark. So basically, in order to determine whether a shadow will be sharp or soft or bright or dark, you need to observe the background carefully. Literally 90% of your problems will be solved just by observing things, taking references and copying from them. Now what if you are in a scenario where you can't determine whether the light in the background is sharp and bright or soft and dull? So in those scenarios, what I do is, instead of observing the background, I observe the subject and the light on the subject and the shadows on the subject and make the contact shadow according to that. So here we have two examples of different mugs. One mug has very soft light and soft shadows, and the other had a very hard light and a hard shadow. And we don't have a background here, so we'll determine the shadow according to these subjects. So for the first mug, which is soft, I'll paint a soft shadow in the right direction because the light is coming from the left direction. This is roughly how the shadow will look for the mug with soft light, and for the mug with hard light and hard shadow, I'll paint a hard shadow. And this is roughly how the shadow will look for the mug with hard light and hard shadow. Now what if you are in a more extreme situation than this, where you can't determine whether the light in the background is bright and sharp, where you can't determine even on the subject whether the light is bright or sharp or dark or soft, and even if you determine those and you try to make a shadow and it doesn't come out good, what do you do? For these scenarios, I have a trick I call universal shadow. Last year I was stuck with a project where I tried to make the shadows in all the ways possible I knew, and it just didn't look good. So I came up with a way. I call it a universal shadow, and it works like magic in pretty much everything. Whenever I am in a pinch or in a hurry, I just use this method and it works like magic. So I'll just show you how to make a universal shadow, which you can use in pretty much every scenario, and will do the illusion, it will do the job. So now we have this cute little cat here. I'll make her big. In order to make this work, you still need to have to decide on a direction where you want to draw the shadow, left or right, front or back. In this case, I can see some shadows here on the left side, so I will draw the shadow on the left side as well. As for the smoothness, darkness, roughness, we don't know anything. So here's the trick that I use. Let's take an empty layer with multiply blending mode first. And what I do is take first a soft round brush and make a nice little shadow on the left side, exactly as the size of the cat. And now what I do is take the eraser and make the part of the shadow which is closer to the cat sharper. Not very sharp, there should be still some softness, but I make these areas a lot more sharper. Where the shadows is closer to the cat, I make these areas a lot more sharper. And as it gets further, I make it a lot more softer. So it's basically just like a diffusion. The light is diffusing, the shadow is diffusing. As it gets closer to the cat, it becomes sharp, and as it goes further to the cat, it becomes soft. So that's how I do it. As further it gets, the softer it gets, and as closer it gets, the sharper it gets. I do the same in these tiny areas as well, just like that. And now one final thing, I do this diffusion thing for the darkness and opacity too. So the part closer to the cat will be dark and the part further away from the cat will be bright or light. So I'll just increase the size of the brush, maybe decrease the flow as well, and make the shaded part of the shadow less dark, or you can call bright. Let's make it a little bit more sharp. And there you go. That's a universal shadow trick that I use, and you can use it too. Let me show you here. Even in this background where everything is supposed to be sharp, if I place this cat, it kind of works. And if I place this in this soft background, it works even better because the light is pretty much soft. Only the part closer to the cat is hard, which I can adjust if I want according to the background. But we made this shadow not knowingly how the lighting in the background is, so it works pretty much perfectly in any scenario. So this is my universal shadow technique that I use when I'm in pinch, and you can use it too. And it's not just like a trick, it is based on real physics. The real shadow also works like this. The further the shadow goes, its opacity decreases and it starts to diffuse. There's one more universal shadow technique that you should know. So first you create an empty layer, set it to multiply, and take a soft round brush, make it big and make a drop like that, and then you use transform. Then you unlink it and squash it down. This shadow is also basically the same as the diffuse shadow I made earlier, except its sharpness is equal around all sides, but the opacity is different. The further it goes away, the opacity decreases, and the closer it gets, the opacity increases. So this is a universal shadow that you can use as well. This type of shadow works very well with circular objects, obviously, because it's made from a circle, and it also works pretty much anywhere. Like here on the cat, it works very nicely. It works for shadows for vegetables, fruits, and all that slightly oval objects. You can also use it for kind of cube, cylindrical, or cuboidal objects as well. It kind of gets the job done. So it's also a universal technique that I use when I'm pinch, and you can try it out too. It also works great as shadow under the foot of a person. You often see this kind of shadow under the foot of players by sports designers. Here are some examples. There are also cases when the light source is coming from both sides, so there can be also cases where you see shadows in multiple directions intersecting each other. There are also cases where you can see a shadow under a shadow, and that usually happens with objects with curved corners, like this ball here, or like front of the car. Here's the tire and here's the front bump. Let's say the ball here is on a ground, and I'll make a quick nice shadow here under the ball here. So what makes a shadow under a shadow happen is the nature of these curved objects. They get slightly far away from the ground. As you can see, here the ball is exactly touching, but slowly they get further away from the ground, so the brightness of the shadow decreases. So either the area directly under the ball is darkened more than the exterior area, or you can choose an eraser and soften the exterior area. That's how you have a shadow under a shadow. Some other normal and common things to keep in mind while working on a shadow: when you determine the direction of a shadow, where the shadow is going to be, like let's say here the shadow is on the left side, you need to darken that side of the subject as well. You need to darken this area of the basketball as well in order to make it realistic and in order to make it believable that the light actually is coming from the right side and the shadow is on the left side. So you need to make the side where the shadow is from on the subject dark too. You can do this by a multiply layer, or you can use any kind of adjustment of your choice. For example, I'm using curves here. I'll just bring the curves down and paint with a soft round brush right here. This makes this a lot more realistic, and the same thing applies for here too. The closer the part is on the ground, the darker it will be. And you don't have to just rely on one adjustment layer. You can duplicate the adjustment layer in order to make some parts even darker. Also, a couple more things to keep in mind: if you're creating a shadow using an adjustment layer, let's say for curves, don't just bring down the brightness only, bring down the midpoint as well to create some contrast. Otherwise it looks so washed out and very flat. And then invert it and then create your shadow. It looks a lot better than just turning the brightness down. It looks so washed out. As you can see, you need to keep the midpoint down as well, not just the brightness point. And same for the multiply layer. If you're using a multiply layer, Don't just use this gray slides and don't just make the shadow with gray color. It works, but you can do better. And how you can do is use an eyedropper tool and pick a dark color from the surface, make it even darker and increase the saturation and hue towards more darker color, and then make the shadow. It will look a lot more real and it will make feel more part of the scene than just doing a gray color. There are some more tricks that you can use to create shadows which will make your life a lot more easier. The first one is that if your image already has a shadow, you can just copy the shadow. You don't have to paint it over again. As an example, we have this image of Jeremy here doing plank. First of all, I'll mask him out and remove the background behind him, and then I'll duplicate him with the background. Then I'll create a hue saturation layer and turn the image into black and white. Then I'll use a curves adjustment layer and turn the areas around the shadow white and the area under the shadow dark. After that, I'll select the shadow layer again and set the blending mode to multiply, and then mask out the area where only the shadow is visible. And there you go, you get the shadow from the image itself. You don't have to paint it yourself. Number 2, creating shadows on a grass surface. For example, we have this grassland here. I will create a very smooth shadow here, and then the trick is to use your eraser and select a grass brush. If the grass brush is similar to the grass in your image, that's even better, and grab that brush and erase the bottom part of your shadow. It will look a lot more realistic. You can erase the top part of the shadow as well, but with low strength, and it will look a lot better and realistic than just creating soft shadow. And so now here's another shadow technique that I call join the legs. So as you can see, we have a table in the scene here, and as the name of the trick suggests, I'll join the legs of the table. So I'll just join all the legs of the table here. After joining the legs, we will move back to our rules. So as our rule says, the closer the object is to the surface, the sharper its shadow will be there. So definitely this part will be closer to the surface as it will be touching the ground. So it will be sharper. So I'll make this part sharp. Same with the other sides. Sharp, sharp, sharp. And the further away the object goes from the shadow, it will become softer and its opacity will decrease. So I'll just do that. I will move the front part here softer, softer, softer. Now that the sharp and soft part is done, we'll deal with opacity now. So the closer the area near the legs will be darker and the further away the area will be lighter. So this middle part in all sides is the furthest away from all the legs, so they will be lighter. So I will just erase them. And also the middle part of the chair is hidden by the top part, so the light will not reach there. So this will be roughly a very default shadow for a table when the light is coming from the top, but here clearly the light is coming from the right side, so the shadows will not be here. The light will going to reach them. Shadows will not be on the front part. They will only be behind the table, sharper near the legs and softer as they go further away. And that's how roughly a shadow will look in this scenario. Here we have another example. Let's assume the light is coming from the top, and then we'll join the leg. The closer the shadow to the leg, the sharper it will be. The further away, the softer it will be. Sharp, 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 sharp. I'm doing it very quickly and roughly here, but you're actually supposed to take your time and refine it properly and use references to see how their shadows look like and copy them and make it as realistic as possible. I'm just here to teach you the rules. You gotta do the hard part by yourself. The same rule applies to humans too, and as I mentioned the squashing method earlier, let's try that. I'll make a nice little shadow here, then use the transform tool and squash it down. Let's move it below them and place it under the feet, and you can see it looks nice. You can make the feet dark as well. Another thing you can do is to not create a shape and squash it again and again, is go to your brush setting and squash it right here in the settings. Squash it, and now your brush shape looks squashed itself. So I'll turn off this layer. So let's try creating a shadow using this and see how it looks. I think it looks okay. We can turn the opacity a little bit down. Not sure, it can be better. Let's try our join the leg method. So I'll fix the brush shape, and the legs are very close, so it's easy to join them. So the closer the shadow will be to the legs, the sharper it will be, and the further away it gets, the softer it will get. Not gonna lie, it actually looks a lot better than those squash shadows. And if I were to follow the direction of light and make the shadows in actual real direction where they are supposed to be, which is on the left side because the light is coming from the right side, they will look a lot more better. Roughly something like this will be a lot better and realistic. You can see shadows like this usually in thumbnails of MrBeast and other creators who use only soft shadows in their thumbnails. Here's a thumbnail that I had made, which I'll analyze real quick. You can see all the objects here, they are placed manually, and the shadows are fake, that were created by me. The cloud is not visible, but you can see and sense from the surrounding here that it is a cloudy environment. There is no sharp light and no sharp shadows. So here you can see, following the direction of light from the right side, I have painted the shadows towards the left side on both the characters, and I have also darkened their shoes towards the left side so it matches on both the characters. And since the environmental light source is soft, I have made the shadows very soft as well. The far away the shadow goes from the feet, it disperses and its opacity decreases, as you can see, and it's more vibrant and sharper closer to the leg as compared to further away. Same with the Lamborghini back here, as in a cuboidal shape methods we have used earlier. It will fit in a cuboid like this, and the shadows are in the bottom surface of the cube where it is touching. And you can see here as well, the surface and tire are touching, so the shadow near the tire is very dark and further away are very light. So you can see the shadow near the tires are dark, and as further away it goes, it becomes lighter and bright. Shadows are supposed to follow the contours of the surface on which they are formed, and that applies on human body too. For example, here is a bottle and the light is coming from the top and back direction. So the shadow is forming in this direction and it is curved, not a straight shadow, it is curved because it is following the contour of the army. One more technique you need to know is when your surface has tiny textures. As you can see, the road has a lot of tiny textures. So if I make a shadow here, it looks kind of flat. So in order to fix that, we'll use blend if. And just by moving a slider, it becomes a lot more dynamic from flat. And don't forget, you only need to create one layer for a shadow. You can always create another layer and make a shadow on that for the same shadow. Here's another thumbnail that I had made in which all the shadows are custom painted. So I'm going to break it down real quick as well. So first I determined the direction of light. From the photo of the subject, it was very easy to determine the direction of light. It is coming from the right side and the shadows are on the left side. So I created some straight parallel lines touching the edges of all the objects placed on the ground here from a light source, and then I painted the area in the left side of all the objects. And after doing that, as you can see, the grass has tiny textures as well, so I have used blend if here as well. The shadows are supposed to be a bit more softer here as well, as they are sharper there. It will become softer as they go further away. Looks like I missed that here. So that's it, and as a wrap up, you should check out these tutorials from other creators as well. And after practicing and applying all these techniques, you will become a master of shadows in no time.